went home for 30 days, and then I reapplied for another 18-month contract.
Okay.
Okay, so I was on my second 18-month contract. By now, I had moved up a little bit from the labor gangs. I was assigned to a little bit more upscale type job.
The African American community was situated next to Hickam Field, was it? Or what?
The area that we were assigned to bordered the 18th and 19th Streets.
Mm-hmm.
The area we were assigned to bordered to a certain extent, I would say, Hickam Field.
Okay.
I'm trying to recall what Hickam Field was called Hickam Field at that time. And presently, it's the airport now.
Mm-hmm.
Airfield now.
Honolulu International Airport.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
that's where the blacks lived in that area?
In that area, just bordered, just close to what is called at that time was Hickam Field.
Is that where the federal prison is? Is it in that general area?
In the general area now is where we were housed. Also in that general area is where most of these facilities that I speak of, like the beer garden and the mess hall and the banquet hall.
Mm-hmm. Now, transportation-wise, you didn't have your own car here, right? Or did you? And was it done by bus or private car?
Usually by bus. And I think to answer one of your questions also, there was a 10 o'clock curfew. And all of at that time, up until the end of the war, everything was blacked out. And the cars had painted over the headlights, other than just a little pinpoint of light to come through. All of the beaches and everything off limits. There was barbed wire on all of the beaches all around the islands.
Mm-hmm.
The Royal Hawaiian was camouflaged. I think the Moana Hotel was camouflaged. All of the hotels that exist now in Waikiki were not there at this time, but there was a 10 o'clock curfew, and we were using bus transportation.
How were the Hawaiians treated, or did you see a difference in the treatment you received from the native people, or were the native people? Did you witness any discrimination against them, or can you talk about that?
This right now, to me, is a very, very personal thing, and I feel very, very strongly. I don't know how to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell the story. I arrived here as a laborer without any special skills. I was assigned to work with several ethnic groups: Filipino, Puerto Rican, some Hawaiian, a couple of Howley kids, Portuguese, and I made friends with all of these people.
Mm-hmm.
But the area where I arrived, Spring Housing Area 3, was pretty much at that time Hawaiian land. Of all of these ethnic groups that I've worked with, the Hawaiians, at the age of 19, the Hawaiians, they all accepted my friendship. Some sympathetic toward me because I was black and that sort of thing. The Hawaiians had a different attitude of their relationship with me. It was almost as if they understood and accepted me.
Mm-hmm.
The Hawaiians accepted me almost without reservations. At the age of 19, this was somehow extremely important to me. And I'm very emotional and very upset about what's happening with the Hawaiian people now. Those people are being abused, and those people were the ones that befriended me. Out of all of the other groups that befriended me, the Hawaiians came through differently, with such acceptance.
Hmm. And were they part of the workforce? Were they
Yes,
were they were
they were.
labor. Okay.
They were part of the workforce here, but at that time, at the age of 19, you're looking for you need a family connection.
Hmm.
You want a family connection, and I had this with. I remember spending the night, and the only ones I didn't have a connection with at that time that I got to know later were Japanese. Japanese, because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, was not permitted on the base to work at Pearl Harbor. My relationship with Japanese came later, which I treasure also.
Hmm.
But that relationship that I had with those other groups remained with me today because they all treated me with such friendliness.
Hmm.
But Hawaiians did it differently. And I feel that they are being abused, they're taken advantage of,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I want to do whatever I can,
Yeah.
whenever I can.
So did they have a truck that would pick you folks up in the morning and take you to your sites, or how did that work on the base?
Okay, from civilian housing area 3, they had what we called a leaping luna. Leaping luna. I think it was a leaping luna. It was something like a trailer that was pulled by a tractor at a pace where you could step on it and
You
get
could
off
step
without
on and step off, and
step
it.
off. And it went from what we lived in civilian housing area 3, from that makeup area, that center area that I spoke of,
Hmm.
through Pearl Harbor, and we would get on it. Excuse me. That's a bit CJ3. Go through the main gate, and then to the submarine base. This was my mode of transportation to the submarine base, and then to the landing at Fort Island, and take the ferry over to Fort Island.
Hmm.
So
What happened when you got sick, or one of you workers got sick, the African Americans? Were you allowed to go to the regular hospitals like anyone, or was there discrimination in the hospitalization of African Americans?
I have no answer to that question. I don't know. I don't think there would have been a problem with the local hospitals.
Hmm.
I don't recall at in those early stages.
Hmm.
Later, later, after I'd been here for quite some time, we had access. As far as I know, there was no restrictions as far as being permitted to go into.
Where'd you get married? You met your wife here.
I met my wife here. Uh, uh, she worked at Fort Island,
Hmm.
and I met her through a friend of ours who worked at Fort Island also. Coincidentally, my wife was Portuguese, and we got married in 1950.
And how many children you have?
We had 4 children. My oldest son died about 3 years ago. They all were born here
Hmm.
in Hawaii.
Okay, so you got 3 children that live here on the island still.
Yeah, one. I moved here where we are now at this home in 1949. I built the home that we are now sharing. And at the time that I moved here, I was the only one. My wife and our 2 babies were the only one that lived here at this called Latye Point. My home is so above sea level, about 70 feet, and we have an awesome view facing north. And each morning and afternoon, we enjoy the sunrise and the sunsets. So it's an awful pleasant place to be. My children grew up here. There were four of them. The oldest son died about 3 years ago. So my next son and my daughter and my youngest son, we share the house. I was employed in 1949 at the airport after I had completed my second civil service contract. There were two 18-month contracts. The first one began in 1943, and I terminated that one and then took a month's vacation, signed up for the second 18-month contract. Then, after I terminated my second contract, I attended school here, the Honolulu Academy of Arts, Honolulu School of Arts. And for 2 years, I attended school and studied to be an art director. After I graduated, I took a job as a window decorator assistant for a year. Then I retired from that after that company closed. And then was employed at the airport in 1949 by a man named Hampton Brazil. Hampton Brazil was a very, very creative individual, a very interesting man. He was out of Louisiana, left Louisiana, I'm not sure when, but came from San Francisco. From Louisiana, came to San Francisco. And the story is that he, while as a sky cap, a porter as they call red caps, as they called them back in those days, in early 1947, he was working then at the airport in San Francisco. And the story goes is that with hat in hand, he boarded a Pan American plane and arrived in Honolulu, the territory of Hawaii at that time, and started the porter services here. He was the forerunner of porter services in the territory of Hawaii. Hawaii was not a state at that time. Statehood had not been attained. So Hampton Brazil hired me along with others. And several of those made major contributions to the Hawaii scene from 1942 to 1950. I'm trying now in the process of making known those who made major roles, played major roles during that period of time. The history of blacks in Hawaii is recorded from the early 80s, late 17th century, but there's a void of from 1942, 1 year after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. There is a void where no known knowledge of blacks in Hawaii. And this is my duty, as I say, a goal, or whatever you want to call it, to make known those individuals who played major roles during that period of time. I knew and made friends with most of the key players of that period. And by being redundant, Hampton Brazil hired most of these people. For an example, one of the employees of his, a man by the name of James Pate, prior to James Pate and his jet valet services, most of the delivery of baggage to and from Waikiki for the VIPs were done by limousine. Jim Pate, as he was called, started bulk delivery in jet valet. The outshoot of that was that now we have major trucking companies doing what James Pate started. At the time that I was working with Hampton Brazil during that period of time, there was a man named Prince Gary. Up until then, up until Brazil came here, we as blacks, other than entertainers and musicians, were not welcomed in the hotels and bars, cocktail lounges of Waikiki. We were not banned from it, we were just not welcome in it, in that part of Waikiki. But Brazil was different. He was accepted there because of his personality, and he somehow or another paved the way for those of us who worked for him and with him to be somehow or another integrated into the Waikiki scene. One of his employees, by the name of Prince Gary, was the first to, to create employment in a Waikiki hotel. Prince Gary had been able to create a relationship with a hotel developer by the name, I hope I can remember, Roy Kelly. Prince Gary became friendly with Roy Kelly. Roy Kelly is the one that developed the Edgewater Hotel. And because of his relationship and his friendship with Prince Gary was able to take and create sky caps in one of the hotels at Waikiki. Other than, as I said, musicians and entertainers were the only one welcome at Waikiki. But because of Prince Gary, I, Gary, and a Filipino young man that worked with us were bellhops in the Edgewater Hotel. There are other stories that I would want to share as time goes by. Those key players in the scene of Waikiki, of Hawaii, pre Civil Rights Days. It's an interesting time, and before we end this session, hopefully I'll be able to bring some of that to the forefront. Most of my military friends were Navy. I was a civil service worker for the Navy. I do know that periodically we would make friends with military from Schofield Barracks, not on a large scale, but to a certain extent. There were some. Uh, the one person that stands out in my mind, and this was in the late, should I say, late 40s, late 40s, a Major Eubanks. We call him William Eubanks. And I met Major Eubanks. Major Eubanks was from New York. Very, very distinguished looking man. And there was a USO club downtown on Richard Street, across from the original main post office. And I admired this man because he was so very dignified. And he and I were sharing a class that was being conducted there. He may have been conducting part of the class, but in parliamentary law. So this is when I first got to know him. And later he retired here, went into civilian life, and married here and raised 2 or 3 children here. I saw one of his sons about a year ago. I don't know what happened to uh, Major Eubanks, but Bill Eubanks played a major role in this Hawaii scene, Hawaii society, as a military, also as a civilian. There were other military people. Again, my close association with them were possibly those at Hickam Field. And Hickam, I think, at the time was Air Force. You had asked about what I did at the airport. I started as an employee, then as supervisor, then as co-owner, then as sole owner. When I left in 19 1974, I think. I sold my interest to my partner, who was a Chinese man, sold my interest to him, and moved back to Athens. I bought a supper club in Athens. I bought a club and renamed it a supper. I created from what had been a private club. This is a story that I would like to share with you. It might give an insight on in my makeup. Hopefully, I'm not drifting around too much. But for some reason, I decided to go back to Athens after I had been into several businesses here at the airport. And during that period, before I left, I was doing baggage storage, doing baggage delivery, baggage. I was doing sales in airport services, airport requirements, cages, all of this sort of thing. I called it the Airport Baggage Center, and it was located about a mile outside of the airport, main part of main airport. I also had a valet service at this time. I created also a music thing during the same period of time. This was prior to my, hopefully I don't mix this up now because some of these things happened after I came back. But I did create the baggage center prior to leaving. But in 1974, I sold my interest in Honolulu, Honolulu Airport Porter Services. That's what my partner and I, it was Honolulu Airport Porter Services. I had attended Church College of Hawaii that eventually became Brigham Young University. I was one of the first, with one of the first classes to move into that new facility at BYU. At BYU, I studied my major was business administration. It was a 2-year school at that time, 2-year college. And I was so enthralled with the, the corporate system that had been created. The corporations were somehow or another something that I just gravitated toward. I saw so many potentials there. And I used that. I used that also from my time at the Honolulu School of Art. I studied something else, and that was the knowledge of real estate. I combined the two, and at one time I owned several businesses that I had purchased, homes I had bought, real estate I had bought. I owned 4 houses in Waimanalo. I owned a home in Foster Village. I owned property in Georgia. I owned, what else? There were several things. At that time, I may have owned maybe 10 real estate ventures prior to leaving in 1974 to go to Athens. It was during this time that I decided to give up all of this and return to Athens for some reason. What I had been doing was making a study the whole time, maybe a year prior to my leaving. I had come up with some kind of idea that I wanted to incorporate in Athens. Now, I had bought some acreage in Athens during the period that I was sharing with you. And on it, I had bought 34 acres in Athens, about 4 miles from downtown Athens. And the idea that I'd worked on for about a year was to create what I call a resort, because I put I put a lake on it. I'd stocked the lake. I had Cub Scouts acreage. I had cabins on it. I had a house. I had a clubhouse for tennis and light sports. And while doing this, I was having a bulldozer do the infrastructure. I went to work for a man who was a county commissioner and was head of the local airport, Athens Airport. And because didn't want to waste time, I went to him and asked him for a job. And I always took my resume with me and get letters of recommendations. And I left there with recommendations from the airport manager here locally, several of the airlines that I'd worked for. So when I put them before this man that was head of the airport in Athens, he said, "Look, Golden," with a very heavy southern accent, "I can't give you my job," he said. "However, I will give you a job." So he gave me a job, driving a limousine from Athens to Atlanta and back. And I got to know this man quite well. And I think I would be safe in saying that his name was Giles, J.B. Giles. Very fine man. And he and I became friends. He would leave and go out to various parts, taking care of his business, and he would ride back with me on the limousine back to Athens. He offered me, he had, this man had so much that he was offering me. Now, at that time, I was still working on this concept of this resort. But what he was offering me, he had some sort of arrangement of transportation system throughout northeast Georgia. He had one son, but he said his son wasn't interested in what he wanted to do. So for practically nothing, he wanted me to have that. But I had other ideas and I didn't accept it.